Let us look at the aims and objectives of the UN. So the aims and objectives of the UN are also known as the reasons why the UN was formed. So in simple terms, we can call them the reasons to why this organization was established. So these include, first we have to create and maintain law, order, and peace. Remember that the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 was a perfect proof beyond doubt that the League of Nations was incompetent in maintaining world peace. Therefore, there was need for another international organization that would bring the world together and maintain peace. So this gave rise to the United Nations. Then another key important objective was to stop aggression. The need to stop aggression was an issue behind the formation of the UN. This is because Kaiser William II and Hitler's aggression were primarily responsible for the outbreak of the First and Second World War respectively. So the UN was therefore formed to protect weaker nations who are vulnerable to aggression from powerful states. It was also formed to administer justice. So the UN was formed to find a way of bringing to justice those who committed crimes against humanity. This included the Nazi and fascists who conducted mass killings of Jews, communists, and other innocent civilians during the war. The UN was therefore to carry out a series of trials through military tribunals and to punish those guilty of terror-related crimes. So that is why the International Criminal Court was established at Hague in the Netherlands. Then another important objective was to enforce disarmament and stop the arms race. The UN was to enforce disarmament and stop the arms race that was responsible for the outbreak of the two world wars. Besides previous weapons like poisonous gas, long-range artillery, missiles, and warplanes, there was also atomic bomb that was made and used by US on Japan. So these weapons of mass destruction were a great threat to the survival of the human race. The UN was therefore to stop the manufacture and use of such weapons of mass destruction. Then another key objective was to facilitate decolonization and democratization. So the UN was formed partly to facilitate decolonization and democratization of those nationalities who were dominated and oppressed. Colonialism and dictatorship had outlived their usefulness, and there was a desire for independence and democracy, especially in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the UN was therefore to ensure that a peaceful transformation from colonialism and dictatorship to independence and democracy. This was because nationalism had been a source of tension that was partly responsible for the outbreak of the two world wars. So this explains why the Trusteeship Council was established. The UN was also formed to check on the threats of environment degradation. So the UN was formed to check on the threats to the environment which was potentially dangerous to mankind. So this was why the United Nations Environmental Programme, or UNEP, was established in Nairobi in 1972. It was to control pollution, desertification, and improve on the rural and urban settlements. Then another key objective or another key reason was to stop drug trafficking and the consumption of intoxicating drugs. So the UN was also concerned with the problem of drug trafficking and the consumption of intoxicating drugs. The sales and consumption of opium, marijuana, Mairunji, and many others were on a scaling level to to peace. So the consumption of these drugs, opium, marijuana, Mairunji, and others were on a scaling level to peace and security. These drugs were causing social unrest, making people to run crazy, idle, and disorderly in the society. So there was therefore need for an international organization to handle such global threats to mankind, hence the formation of the UN. So then we also have another objective, which was to settle refugees. The UN was established to resettle refugees. So the UN was also founded to rehabilitate and resettle those who were displaced and made homeless by the war. The displaced were faced with the problem of lack of basic necessities and the psychological problems. The UN was therefore to provide food, water, shelter, medical care, and psychological treatment to the homeless and displaced people in the world. Then another key objective was to improve economic cooperation. The UN came with the need to improve economic cooperation and the status of the world. It was to mobilize funds to help weaker and poor states to reconstruct and strengthen their economic positions. This was because the Second World War was partly caused by the vulnerability of poor countries to aggression and the economic depression. Then another objective was to promote children's rights. Now, the UNO was also concerned about the violation of children's rights. There was a gross abuse of children's rights, like child labor, corporal punishment, child neglect, and even defilement. The UN was therefore formed to fight for children's rights, and that is why children's rights were declared in 1959. Then besides that, we also have another important objective, and that is workers' rights. So that is workers' rights. The UN was concerned with the exploitation of workers by employers, especially capitalists. So capitalists were exploiting and oppressing workers through poor payments and overworking under poor conditions. This was bound to bring strikes, demonstrations, and violence by workers. The UN was to avoid these, and that is why the International Labour Organization was established, so that it advocates for workers' rights and welfare. Then finally, women's rights. Besides workers' rights, women were also being discriminated and abused by men. The UN aimed at emancipating women and integrating them in developmental programs. This is why women's rights were declared at the Women's Conference of 1975 in Mexico.